couple of weeks back, when everyone was having the vapours over Sinn Féin's alleged election triumph and Nicola Sturgeon started playing footsie with them, I said to a colleague, oh, relax. If you were to hold referenda in all 4 countries of the UK, the only one that would vote by overwhelming numbers to leave the United Kingdom would be England. Well, it was a throwaway line from an upstart colonial, but I see now that Peter Hitchens in the Daily Mail is proposing it for real. Why England should leave the UK instead of persuading the others to stay. And Peter was talking about it with Bev Turner on Brazier earlier today. I thought we'd see what Neil Oliver, whose show airs every Saturday here on GBNews, I thought we'd see what Neil has to make of it. Neil, you're a doughty unionist, but there's a point you must have run into English people who just get sick of being sniped at by various Scots and Irishmen and Welshmen as the years go by.
Absolutely. It's good to see you again, Mark. I'm not a bit surprised to hear Peter's sentiment. Peter Hitchens, who I very much admire, and a great deal of his thinking chimes with my own in relation to all manner of subjects and issues of the day. I suspect there might be an element of mischief making in it. You said yourself that when you said it to a friend, it was a throwaway remark. I've seen Peter on GB News a couple of times in the last couple of days, and I've seen him smile more in the last 48 hours on GB News than I've ever seen him smile, I think, in any other context at any point in my life. So I think something about the channel's agreeing with him. But then again, maybe as well as there perhaps being some mischief making in it from him, perhaps he's 100% serious. I don't actually know. I completely agree with his thesis, part of his thesis, that he wants to celebrate England and Englishness for their own sake, and England should proudly fly its flag, absolutely celebrate its language, celebrate the colossal positive contribution England has made to these islands and to the wider world. But then I feel the same about the pride that ought to be felt by Welsh, Irish and Scottish people besides. And yes, I think I do also, as you say, I sympathise with English people who have spent the best part of a decade now listening to, well, at least the SNP north of the border, carping and harping on about wanting an independence that the majority of the people of Scotland have never wanted, as is demonstrable by the result of the 2014 referendum and, in any meaningful polls at any point ever since. But the fact is that the activists and the agitators of the SNP, although they are a minority, have been very effective at getting most of the airtime, most of the time with the loud hailers, and have given the rest of Britain to understand that Scotland wants to break away, which it doesn't. That has never been the majority view. So there's a distortion that has been whipped up by the Scottish National Party and all the little wizards. I think the same about English people, Scottish people, Irish people, Welsh people. I do not believe in my heart that the majority of the people of these islands, want the disruption that would be wrought by that kind of official, political, constitutional breakup. I think the vast majority of people in the British Isles want peace to get on with their lives unmolested by politicians and the rest of the the troublemakers that are out there, and I count the SNP as troublemakers. But I do sympathise with where Peter Hitchens is coming from with that, what I think might be a partly mischievous thesis.
When you read Peter's column, he thinks that Britishness, as it were, is largely a consequence of empire. And, as I said, just an observation from the upstart colonial, until relatively recently, Canada and Australia, for example, saw themselves as the British nations in North America and the South Pacific. And Sir Robert Menzies, the longest-serving Prime Minister in Australian history, he used to say, I'm British to my bootstraps. Sir John A. Macdonald, the first Canadian Prime Minister, said, a British subject I was born and a British subject I shall die. Well, no, no person who seriously wanted to be politically viable in Canada and Australia would say that today for a moment. There's, Scott Morrison is going to the polls in a couple of days, and that's not going to be his October surprise, his last minute thing to put it in the net. So Britishness, in that sense, has fallen away in Canada and Australia, Jamaica, Barbados, the Solomon Islands. In a certain sense, it's not so surprising that it might also wane in these islands too, is it?
You could argue that. You could make that case. I think ultimately a question like this, which comes down to a sense of self and a sense of identity and a sense of who you are, I would say I would continue to echo the sentiments that you just aired there that used to come out of Canada and Australia. But I still feel British to my core. I always have, and it was for the longest time. It wasn't anything militant or tub thumping or flag waving. It was just, if I was on holiday as a teenager somewhere and someone asked me based on my accent where I was from, I was, depending on what mood I was in, I was just as likely to say British as Scottish. If someone said where was I born, the answer to that question would have been Scotland, because that's the geographical fact. But if someone asked me about my nationality, I would have said British, and that is how I feel. And that's a feeling that has grown more intense as the years have gone on, partly in response to the agitation for breakup that's been going on, since 2014 or earlier. I feel British, and I've never felt anything but proud of that. And my experience, I've made a lot of television around the British Isles. That's a cartographer's convention to name an archipelago after the biggest lump of land within it. Hence, British Isles, because the bigger island is Britain. There's nothing nationalistic about that. But as I have travelled around and spent time in England, Ireland, Scotland and Wales, I've only fallen more in love with the whole place. I have a sense of Britain and Britishness that I hold very close to my heart, and I know that if anything was to happen to break that up, that like the old saw about someone who's had a limb amputated scratches at the missing limb for the rest of their lives. That is how I would feel, because I think if the greater whole was fragmented, any illusion, any notion that the greatness of the whole could be mimicked in the surviving fragmented parts, I see no sense in that. I see no likelihood about that. I feel British. In just an entirely personal way, and I can't really answer the question on behalf of anybody else. For me, it's a question of the heart, and my heart is British.
Right. But it's a little more than heart, isn't it, Neil? Because, for example, Tony Blair decided his big thing was devolution, and he was going to set up these. He basically invented parliaments and stuck them in Edinburgh, stuck them in Belfast, stuck them in Cardiff. And an Englishman notices that and says, well, wait a minute, where then is the English Parliament? Where's the English flag? What public building is the English flag flying over? And rather in the way that they complained about Trump in the US, where they said, well, if you make identity politics such a big thing that what matters is you're black, you're Hispanic, you're Muslim, whatever, don't be surprised that white guys then suddenly say, we'd like a national identity too. Isn't it true that if you have a Scottish Parliament, a Parliament in Belfast, a Parliament in Cardiff, that the English will start saying, well, wait a minute, what about our national identity?
Yes, I think there's a very strong case for that. I think there should be English identity and an English Parliament, and I think the devolution settlement arguably should have done that on behalf of all of the nations of Britain. If asked, I would say devolution's been a disaster for Scotland. We were landed with a system of proportional representation that was supposed to prevent a majority, any one party obtaining a majority. It was supposed to ensure that proportional representation was sustained. But in that way of, a horse designed by a committee ends up looking like a camel. We ended up with this zombie hybrid thing that because it was done under Labour, and Labour believed in its hubris that Labour would always bestride Scotland as the political colossus that it had been for lifetimes. It believed that would always be the case, and I don't think they paid attention to the small print because they never thought it would be an issue. And yet the SNP found a way to game the system, and we've ended up with this, with a one-party state in Scotland. And anyone looking on at Scotland, as most Scots looking inwards at Scotland will tell you, is that the SNP-dominated Scotland has been a disaster about health, about education. A Scottish education used to be something that people trumpeted about having. It used to be something that people, that having experienced the Scottish education system was a matter for great pride. Scottish schools have been taken off of international league tables because it's too embarrassing to continue with the comparison. Infrastructure is failing. The health service is failing. In parts of Glasgow, the life expectancy of a man is the same as a man in sub-Saharan Africa. We've got record drugs deaths. You look at the two ferries, £250 million of public money. Those ferries will likely be scrapped as civil engineering disasters before they've sailed so much as a foot beyond the slipway. Everything about every metric you can consider, the SNP-dominated Scotland has failed. The devolution settlement has let Scotland down.
Just on that. Just on that point, Neil, though, you're quite right. But Nicola Sturgeon would say, well, that wouldn't be all those things wouldn't be a problem anymore if we were independent. And we saw that in her reaction to the elections a couple of Thursdays ago. She's reaching out to Sinn Féin, right? Now, Irish nationalism and Scottish nationalism don't seem to have anything in common, but the fact that they're both opposed to the English guy means they make common cause. That's how the English see it.
Well, yes, I mean, that's just playing along the old line of, my enemy's enemy is my friend. I think it's a very questionable move on Nicola Sturgeon's part, and she has been roundly pilloried, for the approval that she has shown for that result in Ireland. It's divisive to say the least. So, and there has been a lot of criticism. I certainly don't consider myself enough of an observer of the situation in Ireland, really helpfully to comment on that. But I would say that Nicola Sturgeon is on a hamster wheel. There's nothing she can do except continue to promise independence, because the SNP, by definition, is a one-trick pony. It cannot exist. It's an existential crisis for the SNP to do anything but continue to insist that independence is their number one objective, and that at some point there will be jam tomorrow. There's nothing she can do except that. It's so ironic that she's out in North America, or she's been out in North America, banging the drum there. And then in America, the union is indissoluble by federal law.
Yeah.
Were there to be an individual state, I don't know, Arizona or Idaho, where the governor of which was coming to London to talk loudly about secession, that's severe.
No. There would never have been an Irish Free State if it had been operating under, if that United Kingdom had been operating under the Constitution of the US.
Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows, and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.